Welcome to this bright fall day in Washington, D.C., and it's my pleasure to not only welcome you, but on behalf of the Center for Children and Families that I co-direct along with Ron Haskins to introduce you to a new project in New York City that I think is pretty unique and pretty exciting. And I think we all have been concerned about the amount of poverty that we've seen in the United States recently, in the wake of the Great Recession in particular, and the fact that it's been very hard to do anything new and that could help struggling families or individuals. And this idea that we're going to be talking about today is actually an effort on the part of New York City to do something about the problem, but to pilot it first to see how it works and to have it carefully evaluated in the process. We're really happy to have with us today the Deputy Mayor of New York City, Linda Gibbs. She's going to be on a panel later this morning. We will also be welcoming Congressman Sandy Levin. He's going to be a little late, but when he gets here, we'll accommodate him in our schedule and be hearing from him with a view from Capitol Hill. He is, as you know, the ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, and thus pretty important in terms of where ideas of this sort might eventually go. In the meantime, I want to say that the intellectual godfather of this idea of providing a EITC-like wage supplement to single individuals is none other than Gordon Berlin, who you're going to be hearing from first. There are other people who've written about the idea, including Harry Holzer, who will be on the panel, and a number of others, but I think we're particularly proud at the Center for Children and Families that this idea was first written about in a volume that we co-edit with Princeton University called The Future of Children. And Gordon first wrote about this proposal, or made this proposal, in an article that he did in The Future of Children a few years back. And so you're first going to be hearing from him about what the program is all about and how it's being evaluated in New York City. It's already in the field and happening, and so I think this is really quite exciting. Gordon, for those of you, I think most people here know Gordon, but Gordon is president of MDRC, and MDRC is probably the premier research and evaluation organization in the country or in the world. I don't think there's any other country that has an MDRC as far as I know, Gordon. And maybe I'm a little biased because I'm on the board, as is Ron, but we think it's a terrific organization. They've done all these randomized controlled trials of social programs, and as a result of their work, we have really learned a ton about what works and what doesn't. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Gordon.
Well, thanks, Belle. I don't think I've ever been called the godfather of anything, so I'm speechless. So I'm really pleased to be here to present this bold new initiative that the City of New York has undertaken to tackle the complex set of problems that low-wage workers face. And a number of people, many more than just Harry and I, have talked about and proposed at different periods. In fact, more than 10 years ago, the need to think about having an earned income tax credit that was more generous than the current income tax credit for singles as an answer to the interrelated problems of low wages, inequality, and increasingly the bleak prospects for low-income males, especially minority males. Now, because this project is designed as a research and demonstration project, it means that we are now going to have an opportunity to learn more about the potential of this kind of initiative, both any positive effects as well as any unintended effects. And we view this forum today as an opportunity to engage committed, knowledgeable people in helping us to think through what are the right questions that we should try to answer in carrying out this project. So what's the problem that an enhanced EITC for single workers could address? And I want to really focus on three key issues. The first is a labor market characterized by stagnant and declining earnings, as well as falling employment rates. And those problems are especially significant for those with limited education, for men, and for minority males. Second, a tax and transfer system that inadvertently distorts the incentive to work, marry, and bear children. Now, we've worked quite a bit at trying to resolve some of those issues on the marriage side, but some of those problems still exist. And let me give you an example. Let's say that Belle and I work side by side selling retail clothes at Target, and we both make about $11,000 or $12,000 a year. But Belle has 2 children. She's the custodial parent of those children, and she, at the end of the year, is going to get a supplement from the Earned Income Tax Credit of about $6,000. I, on the other hand, have no children that I'm the custodial parent of, and I'm going to get basically no enhancement as a result of my work, or really modest enhancement. And that creates a set of disparities between us, because there we are working essentially side by side at the same job, but ending the year with substantially different incomes. And the third point is the reality that low-wage work is really here to stay. I'm not saying that low-wage work is the future of America, but it's certainly going to be a big part of the range of jobs that are going to be available to people in the future. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics projections through the year 2020, 5 of the top 6 jobs categories that will create the most jobs are occupations that, or job categories that pay less than $24,000 a year. So it's going to be a big part of the future. And taken together, these interrelated problems really describe an alarming landscape for disadvantaged young men especially, but also young women with limited education. So one answer, of course, is to raise the minimum wage. There's a big debate that we're engaging in right now about that. New York State has engaged in that debate, and they've decided to raise the minimum wage. It's going to go up to $8 on January 1st, then to $8.75, and then to $9. Another way to respond to the problem is to enhance the Earned Income Tax Credit. And ideally, and this is essentially the test that is now underway in New York, we would be doing the two things together. There's a strong body of evidence on the effects of the EITC and from the Make Work Pay experiments that MDRC ran, indicating that making work pay at the low end does increase employment, it does increase earnings, it increases income, it even has positive effects for children, but we're less clear about what those effects are likely to be for singles and young men. So this chart just really illustrates the problem that I just described. We're looking at real hourly wages between 1973 and 2012, a nearly 40-year period, and it's laid out by education level. And as you can see, the big part of the problem has been for those with a high school diploma or less. In 1973, the average high school graduate was earning $16.77 an hour. Today, the average high school graduate is earning $15.78, $1 less. These problems have been especially acute for males. In 1973, a high school dropout was actually earning $17 an hour, and today they're earning about $12.75. That's a 25% decline. What's startling about the chart, why it's worth looking at and thinking about, is during this same exact period, GDP was rising. It more than doubled easily during this period. So that means that the historic relationship between economic growth and wages has fundamentally broken down. And that's a big part of the policy problem that we need to address. So what is Paycheck Plus, and how would it begin to address that set of issues. Well, it pays a supplement of up to $2,000 a year for earnings in 2014, 2015, and 2016, with the first payment scheduled to be made in April of 2015 when an individual files their income taxes. The program's being operated by the Food Bank of New York. It's the city's largest VITA center. They serve a very large number of people each year, and they're also responsible in this project for recruiting and enrolling participants into the study and the program, doing tax preparation, then with our help calculating the payment amount that someone will be due at the end, and then initiating, along with the payment vendor, the cutting of that check to the individual. The goal is to recruit and enroll about 6,000 participants by early 2014, half of whom will be able to receive the supplement. And we've enrolled so far, we started about 6 weeks ago, we've enrolled 1,500 people to date into the study. The recruitment is going to be using the VITA Systems list of previous people they've worked with, and HRA, the city welfare department, is helping us with people who have child support orders, as well as individuals who are food stamp or SNAP recipients. And we're flooding work assistance centers and welfare offices and criminal programs that serve ex-offenders, and food lines, and just about every other venue that we can think about in order to identify low-income men to work with. Eligibility is for 21 to 65-year-old men and women with no dependent children, dependent being in the filing your taxes sense, who earn less than $30,000 a year. We're trying to target a minimum of 1,000 non-custodial parents and 800 ex-offenders. And then we want to have a mix of people who have no earnings currently, are earning less than $18,000, and are earning between $18,000 and $30,000 where this credit phases out. And our goal is to measure any differences that emerge between the two groups, the group that's eligible and the group that's not, in their employment and their earnings and their income, in family formation, and child support paid, and in criminal justice involvement. So how will the system work? This is the current EITC. It tops out at $575 for earnings in the sort of $600 to $7,400 range. So somebody who worked 1,500 hours a year, a little more than half time, at $8 an hour, would be getting a supplement of about $200, and if they worked full-time at $8 an hour, they'd get no supplement whatsoever. So how does the Paycheck Plus change that picture? In the phase-up range, an $8 an hour job becomes a $10.40 hour job, up until income reaches about $6,667. That maximum payment of $2,000 continues all the way until earnings reach $18,000. At $18,000, that's the equivalent of working at $9 an hour full-time. You'd get an extra $2,000, raising your total income to $20,000. As income rises above that $18,000 figure, we'll begin to phase out the credit. At $20,000, of earnings of $20,000, the credit payment will be about $1,600. At $25,000, the payment credit would be about $835. And then it will phase out at about $29,900. Now, how does that compare to the current EITC for a single parent with one child? The Bell example that I gave earlier. That credit phases up and phases down at pretty much the same rates as this one, but the peak maximum is about $3,100, $3,170, something like that, $3,170. So we're beginning now to close that gap, but we're still saying, we should be paying more if somebody does have a child. Okay, so what are the implications of this for me and Belle? How well have we done in closing this parity gap? So on the left, you can see Belle. She's wearing a lovely pantsuit, and she's there with her single child. She earns $11,650, the same amount as me for selling clothes at Target, and she gets a current EITC of $3,170. I, on the other hand, on the right, am making the same amount of money, but under the current EITC, I get an additional $180. Under Paycheck Plus, we're going to top up that $180 to by $1,820, bringing the total amount to me to $2,000 in supplement for a total income of $13,650. About $1,200 or so less than Bell, but substantially having closed that gap. So by creating greater parity in the labor market, a singles EITC as public policy helps to make low-wage work pay. And the estimates that are out there are that every 10% increase in earnings or wages is equal to usually a 5 to maybe 10% increase in employment rates. And we're going to be looking to try to understand better what difference that makes. So what are the questions we hope to answer? Will expanding the EITC to single adults boost employment rates? Will it increase earnings and reduce poverty? Will it reduce criminal justice involvement? How will it change family formation? How will it increase child support payments, among other questions? And we'll be tracking families over the next, or the individuals over the next 4-year period to try to understand what those effects are over time. I mean, I think it's really important to remember this is an expensive policy if it was to become national policy. There are potential unintended consequences that we'd want to learn about. I mean, from an equity point of view, I think it's pretty clear this would be a good thing to do, but there are a lot of choices one could make with the kind of expenditure that would be required here. And we have this remarkable opportunity to learn more than we've known so far. We're out of the realm of the theoretical of Harry and I guessing about what the effects might be, and we're actually going to have an opportunity to learn it. Thank you.
I think we may be getting some mics here, but I have a pretty loud voice. Can you all hear me? Let me just start out, Gordon, and pick up on your example of you and I are both working at Target. We both have low-wage jobs. I have a child, and I'm getting the EITC that is, a little over 14, almost 15,000. I mean, with the EITC, that's what my income is. And you're not, or you're getting this very small one. So let's suppose now that my child is your child also. It's just that we're not living together. How does this work? Maybe, you visit occasionally. Maybe you have a child support order, but we're not married, and you're not part of my household. Is it okay now for you to get this and for us to combine our resources? This is a genuine question. I just don't understand the rules of the program.
Right. So there are two answers. One are, how will this supplement work in this demonstration project? And to be eligible, we're aiming at singles, so you wouldn't be married. But if we had the relationship you described, I would qualify for this singles EITC. You would qualify for yours. And if we chose to live together and an attractive offer, if we chose to live together and share resources.
Nobody ever says that to me anymore.
And share resources, we could do that.
We could. Mm-hmm. So then what is the incentive for us to get married?
Well, you could also...
I mean, if we get married, will we be worse off or better off than combining the two?
Under this plan, if you got married, you would continue to receive the supplement. How to structure federal policy if we were to go down this route based on the findings from a study like this is one of the big open questions. It's expensive, but it could have a really important effect on decision-making regarding, this set of distorted incentives that I described at the outset to work, marry, and bear children.
I guess another question, obviously, is the costs, which are not small. And you mentioned the idea of combining an increase in the minimum wage and something like a EITC for singles, or an expanded EITC more generally. And I think that idea has been around for a while. I think obviously the benefit of a minimum wage increase accomplishing the same kinds of goals here is that it's much cheaper, at least in terms of federal budgets or state budgets or anybody else's budget. The private sector and employers may not like it as much. How do we think about the trade-offs here between increasing the minimum wage and doing something with the EITC? Is the argument that the EITC path is better targeted? What would you say to someone who said, I just want to raise the minimum wage? That's much more, for all the political problems or challenges of doing that, it's so much cheaper than this.
Yeah. So I think, we all know about the politics of raising the minimum wage, and it has been with us for a very long time. We start to catch up, and then gradually we fall way behind again. Ideally, we would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but I think even then, economists who are in favor of raising the minimum wage would begin to get a little bit nervous about the effects on the labor market and the range of opportunities available. So I think in an ideal world, we would do both, and the two would work hand in hand. There's no reason that the government should bear the full price of this. After all, as I pointed out earlier, GDP growth has been quite substantial, and part of the challenge I think we face as a country in the new sort of information age is how to more evenly distribute the wealth that gets generated. So part of that is having employers pay higher wages. How high you can go remains a problem, and I think the compromise that we're going to be in a position to test, because the whole time that we're running this demonstration project, the New York State minimum wage will go, as I said, to $8 on January 1st of 2014, then to $8.75 the following year, and in 2016 to $9 an hour. And we'll be able to look at the interaction between the two.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. Who would like to ask a question out there in the audience? No one? Yes, in the back row there.
Linda Wolfe-Jones, full disclosure, used to work for MCDA decades ago.
Hard to hear you. Can you take the mic, maybe?
Oh, there is a mic. Yes, Linda Wolfe-Jones, many years ago, an employee of MCDA, which was working to do some of these same kinds of demonstrations. I guess I really have two questions. One is just a startling comment. You said that were you to get married, you then could both stay in the program. And so I'm picturing that here's a couple who is married, who can't get into the program to begin with, but if you got married while you were getting this EITC, you could remain married. And that to me sounds very strange. The other is just a personal, why did you choose at 65 years of age?
The last part of her question, which the mic went off, was what happened? Why did they pick 65 as the top age eligibility?
Well, I would have thought you would have asked about why 21. That tends to be more controversial. Given the problems we were trying to target, we just thought that we really are interested in the effects of this policy at the low end. Again, this is a demonstration project, and we're trying to understand what the effects, to your first question, what the effects are on family formation and relationships. And so we thought it made more sense to test it in a way in which we would begin to overcome some of these problems that currently exist. And of course, in a national policy, you'd have to resolve some of these issues about how these two things work. But the whole point is to have a set of policies that treat us all the way we're treated, whether you're on them or not, so that we can make decisions about family formation in the way that everybody else makes them. And that's really what we're trying to understand at this point.
But I understand that her question, and I sort of had the same question, is there then an inequity going to be created between the already married and the people who get married, newly married? And I guess your answer is we don't know yet because we haven't dealt with that.
Yeah, so the current EITC, if you're married, is slightly larger than, so if you have one child and you're single, you get an amount that's, I think, 1,000 or 1,500 or so less than if you're married and have one child. So this credit there would be an issue there. We'd have to think through how to resolve that. But again, at this point, we're really trying to understand, once we make work pay, what's the likely effect on employment and earnings and this other set of issues. And then we would have to, if we were to then take it to national policy, begin to figure out how to resolve those kinds of issues if they were created.
Yes, here.
Thanks. Clint Key, Pew Charitable Trust. I have two questions that are related to generalizability out of the New York City experiment. The first, obviously, the New York City labor market, and particularly the New York City low-wage labor market, is fairly different and unique relative to national labor markets. So I'm interested in your thoughts about how whatever findings might translate out of that context. And related to that, whereas the EITC is delivered through the tax form and through the IRS, this will obviously go through a separate process, including a process of selection into it. VITA filers aren't the typical tax filer. So I'm curious how you see the findings translating towards national policy and how that might condition your understanding of what you learn.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we're just starting with the VITA list. We expect them to make up a relatively, small part of the total sample. We're, reaching out to a wide variety of venues to try to identify singles, both men and women. So I think we're going to do reasonably well on the generalizability side. I mean, I think if there's selection, the selection is if you went to work, you'd make more, and are there a group of people who don't come forward to do that? And that seems to me to be the question we have for the nation, not just for New York City. In terms of the labor market at the low end, I'm not sure how different it really is. I think the minimum wage amounts are a little higher than in some other places, like in the Midwest. But, custodial, hospital orderly, store guard, retail sales, those occupations all feel pretty similar to me as in other places. The only difference might be that you drove your car there rather than ride the subway. But I don't know, we could talk about that. I haven't thought that much offhand, but it's great to hear these kinds of questions so we can think about whether there are issues there.
I have one last question that's about this issue of very complex family arrangements these days. And that is, if we go back to our example of you and I are both working at Target, but now I don't have any children. So I'm eligible for this myself. And I'm looking around at the kinds of guys that are marriage material or even material to be the father of my children, and I'm not wild about what I'm seeing. Sorry. Now I get, my low wage topped up by up to $2,000. Maybe that tips me into this decision to really just go it alone. And so will you be looking at impacts on not only marriage and family composition, but also whether young women have children or not?
So we will have young women in our sample. We're not sure how many, but we're definitely going to be looking at issues of childbearing and family formation for both the men and the women in the sample. I mean, I think we need to be realistic about how much family formation effects we're likely to find in this 3-year temporary demonstration initiative. In terms of the worry about, I've made it, made you better off by $2,000, so you're now less likely to pick me or some other eligible older male for your partner. I just think we'll just have to see what comes out of that. I don't think these dollar amounts are big enough to drive things at that level. And remember, a good chunk of the people that I'll have to choose from would also be getting 2,000 more than they
That's
might have
true,
been getting
yeah.
otherwise.
We could,
But you only get that 2,000 at wages up to at earnings up to $18,000, and then it begins to phase out. So,
right, okay. So maybe we should bring up the panel now and have more discussion of all of these issues, I'm sure. But thank you so much, Gordon.
great, thank you.
Welcome to Brookings. My name is Ron Haskins. I'm, along with Bell, co-director of our Center on Children and Families. Some people say I work for Bell. I think that's mostly accurate. So I greatly enjoy it, though, Bell. We've had a lot of panels here since I've been here, and I don't know that we've ever had a more distinguished panel than this. It is really an amazing panel from many perspectives, as I think you'll discover it.
Ron, I've heard you say that to every panel.
I have never said that before. Never. I might have said it once when you were on the panel, because that would make it one of the... all right, so let me just say a word about the panels. You have all kinds of information in your folder, so I'm just going to say a few things. Linda Gibbs, all the way down there on the far right, is the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services in New York City, and I think it's fair to call her the Chief Architect of... I wish there were other mayors here so we get a big argument about this, but the most innovative, bold city government in the United States, maybe ever. The number of things that they have done is shocking. And many of them, I can't believe there's a mayor that allows most of his big ideas to be tested by random assignment design, because we all know the fate of random assignment programs is usually they don't work too well. So it's an amazing thing, and won all kinds of awards. The mayor is, I think, getting an award today, right?
Yes, this evening.
And yet, for all this wonderful work, plus he contributed some of his own money to many of these things so they could find out if they work for it. They try to get taxpayers to pay for it. There's an original idea. You should call Toronto and tell the mayor in Toronto about that. But it really is, it's an amazing set of things that have happened in New York. Doug Holtz-Eakin, who is in the middle there. Doug is a former director of the Congressional Budget Office. He's now president of the American Action Forum. He's a frequent guest at Brookings. And I'm going to say this about Doug. If you want a reasonable and perceptive answer from a conservative, he's the best person to ask.
So much for the
Can't
praise.
deny it, Doug. Guilty as charged. Did you say, well, there are no others? Next, Harry Holzer, who's seated appropriately on Doug's left. He's a distinguished labor economist at Georgetown and the Urban Institute. He's a former chief economist at the Department of Labor. I think Harry has written 11 books and 5,396 articles. And he has solved the problem of sleep. He sleeps on Tuesday and Thursday nights and occasionally on Saturday. So that's how he's able to do all that. Joe Jones, right here on my right. I love to have Joe on my right.
Hey, man, watch that.
He's the founder and head of the Center for Urban Families in Baltimore, and also, this is something that people just don't know about, but he's the head of a national group called the National Fatherhood Leadership Group, which is a really important group of small community-based organizations, primarily black, and Joe has been doing this for many, many years. I cannot tell you the political adeptness with which he has exercise his leadership under incredibly challenging circumstances. So I really admire him for that. But his center is also a thing of beauty in Baltimore. So Joe is just one of the most distinguished community-based leaders in the country. And then Vicki Turetsky, next to the end over there. By a process of subtraction, she's the only person left. So, of course, I'm talking about Vicki Turetsky. She's the commissioner of the Office of Child Support Enforcement. She is a brilliant example of a person who has had a background in government service, in research and scholarly activity, and in advocacy. Now, those last two often don't go too well together, but I have to say I've read a lot of Vicki's work. I've talked with her many, many times over the years because we've both been very interested in child support. And she really is a very insightful observer and willing to call them as the research shows them to be. So that's very impressive. We're going to start. Each panelist is going to make a 7-minute statement. Sometime in the middle, Mr. Levin will show up. And when Mr. Levin shows up, whoever's speaking will finish. Everyone will keep their seats. Mr. Levin will come to the podium. I'll introduce him. He'll give a talk. Then I'm going to ask him a couple of questions, all this at the podium. Then we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions. And then he'll leave, and then we'll resume the panel. So, Joe, will you help me remember where I left off when the...
I will,
yeah,
yes.
good, okay. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's begin with Linda Gibbs.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. This, is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. So this initiative is actually sort of like a third or fourth generation chapter in our anti-poverty work that began about 8 years ago in New York City as a very targeted set of interventions that were asking the question, what can we do differently that can sort of disrupt the pattern of poverty that we have? We saw huge changes in the 90s as New York, along with other states in the nation, implemented welfare reform. And so big increases in employment among low-income or no-income women, big drops in child poverty for those households, so drops in child poverty driven by the increase in employment for the women, who are the custodial moms. And when we were taking a look, basically things had sort of flattened out since then. The early 90s, or early 2000, we just weren't seeing any changes in the poverty rates. And this was, we actually started this work pre-recession, and we all know what happened once the recession hit. But the question that we started asking ourselves is, all right, here's the array of social services, the safety net, our employment incentives. What can we do differently that might sort of disrupt this? And we really dug in on 3 populations: the working poor, Black and Latino young men, adolescent, 16 to 24-year-old, 24-year-olds in particular, but men as the one that, we saw worse outcomes, and then very early age children, 0 to 5. So I want to focus here on just this question of the 16 to 24-year-olds. So we created an agenda for those 3 populations, but one of the really important things that the mayor wanted us to do was to be really rigorous about figuring out whether or not our work actually had an impact. Are these, he's great at letting us do crazy new things. Some things are not so crazy, but some of them are pretty out there. And he's like, as long as you believe that this is something that might disrupt and create a change for the better, and as long as you do an evaluation and to find out, let's answer the question, is this working? So we created a center, we call it the Center for Economic Opportunity, to sort of help to implement this range of programs, but to ask that question, is it working? And if it's not working, let's end it and take the dollars and reinvest. Without going into the details of that, what we found about 4 years later was, again, things working, things not. But one of the areas where I would say that we both had a disappointing level of failure, as well as some encouraging glimmers of hope, was really in this adolescent population, the young adult population. But it was also getting increasingly disturbing to us about just the trajectory and the fact that we weren't seeing the improvements for the young men. And so what we did is we basically dug in deeper, and we created what we call our Young Men's Initiative, and expanded out the work for the programs on health, education, employment, and justice to increase the efforts around these young men. And so bigger investments there, all targeted really on the observation that what we have in the social services is what I've come to realize people refer to as the feminization of social services. Government programs, for the most part, have been structured a great deal by direction of federal policy to the individuals. You're trying to get to the kid. And so if you're getting to the kid, you're basically going through the custodial parent who is the mom. And so therefore, a lot of the programs are really directed to women. And it's left the men out. They've sort of been, where I see them in my jurisdiction, I see them in droves in the justice system. You just don't see them in the safety net, the social welfare system. And so our question is, what can we do to sort of pick up on great lessons learned from the work that's gone on to be successful in increasing employment for women and carry that over? How can we take those lessons and apply them to the men? And so a strong partner all along in this work has been Gordon Berlin and his colleagues at MDRC, and advising the city on the Young Men's Initiative broadly. But Gordon was really brought this conversation to the city's attention. What if we took the half of the coin? In welfare reform, it was the changes in the public assistance program and the incentives toward greater engagement with the workforce, paired with investments in childcare and pumped up EITC. Those were the three sort of legs of the stool that really drove that increase for the women. What if we take that lesson and ask, can it work for men? The dads are typically not with the women. The vast majority of kids born in low-income households in New York City and are kids who are being born in single-parent households. We know that's a prescription to their growing up in poverty and just perpetuating the cycle of poverty. If we're going to be successful in helping young men, not only can we get them back on track, but it also poses the possibility that you can help them to be better economic contributing parents to their children and further reduce child poverty. And you can help to sort of get the social fabric of the city back toward a place where where families are not disintegrating and people are not feeling so alienated from the economic mainstream. So that was really the origin. Kristen Morse and her team at CEO, so Gordon had encouraged us to do this. We took a run at Charlie Rangel when he was the head of Ways and Means. We had a little angle going there. That one didn't work out. This came back, and we sort of sold the mayor on the idea, but it was, for the city, 5-year program, $11 million. It's still a pretty expensive proposition, and that's where Kristen stepped forward with her team and said, the mayor said we should end those programs that aren't working and invest in the dollars either where, expanding things that are working or try new things. And it so happens this was, she had just completed a round of evaluations. 4 or 5 programs that it was time to recognize that these were programs that were not working, which is such a truly exceptional thing to do. And so going through the very challenging process of letting those programs know that, that the effort was, you gave it a good try, but it's time to call it quits and move on. And we took the resources from those programs and invested in this EITC pilot. And so the big effort, bottom line, is that we're in a bad place for Black and Latino young men in this country and in New York City. And we've just got to pull out all the stops and figure out what's going to change that trajectory. And this, we think, is an important possible piece of that puzzle.
Great, thank you. Pull out stops. She's exactly right. Vicki.
Well, let me first start with a couple of caveats. First of all, the administration does not have a position on expanding EITC or how it's
anything
targeted.
Else in New York City either.
Or anything else in New York City, that's right. Although I do want to mention that then Senator Obama introduced legislation back in 2006 and thereafter with an EITC proposal that was a little different from the one that is being tested in New York City, and instead would specifically target non-custodial parents. And that particular model was proposed by Elaine Sorensen, who was at the Urban Institute, but now works for us at OCSC. So we have been very interested in watching the field and seeing what works in the area of EITC. And then, so when you hear my remarks, understand that they're directed to more general policy considerations, whether we're designing a demonstration or setting national policy. The whole point of a demonstration is to experiment and test ideas and try to use that information to make judgments about policy down the road. But I do want to applaud you for the city for conducting the demonstration project. I think it'll give us a lot of useful information about what would work to help raise the boats of young low-skilled men as well as low-skilled women, and I really associate myself personally with the remarks that you made. What we really need are policies that help reduce poverty and encourage work among low-income fathers and other single adults. But I want to say here that adults not living with dependent children is saying a different thing than adults that lack dependent children. And it is not the case that the potential participants in the demonstration are without dependent children in many cases, although the eligibility criteria are open to those with and without kids. Tax status aside, and whether or not the EITC model focuses on the family status of the participants as a condition of receipt, many of the participants that this demonstration is going to serve are low-income, non-custodial parents, usually low-income fathers, and they have kids, and their kids are dependent on them for financial support, as well as parenting. Additional employment-based income, additional income period, but additional income that's based on employment, as the EITC is, I think stands a good chance of helping low-skilled fathers meet their fundamental responsibilities to take care of their kids, as every parent has that responsibility, that in turn can provide more financial breathing room for both parents and the kids, create more employment stability that in turn will help with family stability and, frankly, community stability, as Linda referred to, and can reduce the disparities in the income supports available to custodial parents and non-custodial parents, as you also mentioned. So I think that the demonstration could have findings that support the idea that an EITC can help raise the income support for kids, improve the relationship between the parents, and encourage more constant involvement between parents and children. Now, we well understand the circumstances of many of the participants, those with kids, because they're in our caseload. But the fact is, child support is a major family support anti-poverty program as well in its own right. And the goal is that children can count on that support from both parents. The child support program really aims and has achieved the goal of ensuring that there's parity between the parents, so that both parents are contributing to the kids. And in fact, the data suggests that both non-custodial and custodial parents contribute about equally to their kids' support through their earnings. I think the key question is whether child support should be garnished from EITC, and I will leave that for a follow-up question, or I can talk to it now. I want to make one further point, which is that I do think that when you look at that question, you also have to look at where the child support is going. And there is a history in the child support program of of using child support to repay welfare benefits. That was the old days. Today, 94% of the child support collected for families is paid to families, not used to reimburse welfare. But I do think that changes the equities to the extent the money isn't going to the family.
Thank you, Vicki.
Thank you.
Doug?
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to be here today. And long ago and far away, when I was an academic, I actually edited a research volume on the earned income tax credit and its effectiveness. And it's nice to see this effort once again. I guess my basic reaction is this is simply very impressive. First of all, I want to echo what Ron said. To really subject this to random assignment and to evaluate it rigorously is a tremendous undertaking, and we're going to learn a lot about it. I think it's time for a fresh look at this. And from a research design point of view, I think one of the things I'm very interested in looking at is the labor supply effects in pretty close detail. For the EITC, there's a sort of a pretty simple bottom line, which is that it looks like it moves people from out of work to work pretty effectively. And then there's a minor issue about the fact that when you phase out the EITC, you essentially place a higher marginal tax rate on people's efforts. And to the extent that we can find some labor market disincentives from those higher marginal tax rates, it looks to be in couples and second earners in couples. But it doesn't appear to be very big. And this is another chance to look at that again. I mean, many people, myself included, worry a lot about the fact that the lowest income Americans have some very high effective marginal tax rates. And one of the reasons I think this would be an interesting opportunity is there are now other programs out there that have those same kinds of phase outs, whether there are other income tax credits that are phasing out, but now the Affordable Care Act and the amount of support you'll get there also phases out. And it'll be interesting to look through this period with this group to see if there's any new evidence about the labor market implications of those effective marginal tax rates on low earners in America. I think that's an important topic. If it remains the case that what you're really finding is you move people from out of work to work, then that's an important thing to know and changes how you think about the structure of anything that might go on at the national level. It's also, I think, just tremendous in terms of its anti-poverty effects. I mean, if you look at the work of, for example, Bruce Meyer, who has looked at alternative measures of poverty that are focused on the effective standard of living of people, how much they consume, what comes out of that research is something very clear, which is there are only two programs that have dramatically changed the poverty picture in the United States. One is Social Security, very successful old age poverty, and the other is the Earned Income Tax Credit, very effective at combating poverty. And so if we want to have an anti-poverty program, I think this is the right place to look. It would raise this very substantial question of budgetary resources, and that's a reality. But I think it's important to face those budgetary problems anyway, because the way we are currently structuring the federal budget is one in which old programs and programs that serve the old, quite frankly, the big entitlements, are really pushing out other funded programs, all the discretionary programs where the investments can take place. And we need to come to terms with that. If this is the effective anti-poverty tool and this is how we can get people to work, we need to find room in the budget to invest in those workers and their children and thus switch the anti-young bias that's built into the federal budget. And I think that's a central agenda for our time. I also just love the fact that this focuses on work. We have seen lots of expansions in non-work kinds of programs in recent years. The Affordable Care Act is one. We've seen increases in unemployment insurance. We've seen increases in food stamps. There's lots of controversy about which way the causal errors go there. Are they getting bigger because of economic conditions, or do they feed into those economic conditions? But we haven't seen a focus on work for a long time, and I think this is a tremendous step in the right direction from that point of view. And then I guess the one place where I would disagree with what's been said so far is I'm glad this is not an increase in the minimum wage. The minimum wage, to my eye, doesn't have any of these virtues. It is poorly targeted on poverty. Minimum wage workers are not uniformly in poverty households, and if we're going to deal with poverty, we got to focus on people in those households. And while there's lots of fights about the work impacts of the minimum wage, I think the balance of the evidence is that it does, in fact, deter hiring. I don't think anyone loses their job over minimum wage increases, but it does deter hiring. I don't think that's something we need right now, either from an employment point of view or because it has this paradoxical inequality effect, which is if all you do when you raise the minimum wage is you stop people who are currently unemployed from getting a job, you've effectively redistributed income from the unemployed to the employed. That doesn't strike me as a sensible way to go at this point in time. So I'd rather stay out of a minimum wage fight, focus on something like this, which has a track record of success on work and poverty, and glean whatever evidence we can from this effort to design superior programs at the federal level.
Doug, thank you. Harry Holzer.
Thank you, Ron. So I should start with full disclosure. I'm on the advisory committee for Gordon on this project, along with some other distinguished folks, and I've been, like all the speakers, quite excited about this. At the end of the 1990s, I was among a group of labor economists that started to notice that if you adjust for the business cycle, if you adjust for that 1990s boom that we all remember so fondly, low-income women were pouring into the job market, and low-income men continued to pour out of it. And we were disturbed by the fact that these trends looked so different. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. Welfare reform, of course, was pushing in a lot of the low-income women. Incarceration and other issues were driving a lot of the men out. But another big difference seemed to be on these policies, that there was a whole set of make-work-pay policies targeted at the women, and especially the moms, the EITC, child care subsidies and things like that. And there was nothing like that at all for the men. And so a lot of us at that time started to think about and started to advocate for at least some of these policies. Now, maybe at lower levels, because the men didn't have the custody. And by the way, this policy obviously isn't for men only. It's for childless adults, but clearly that's the target population that a lot of us are interested in. There was always a lot of discussion of whether or not we should target non-custodial fathers more narrowly, as opposed to childless adults more broadly, and it would be certainly cheaper to do the narrow thing. But for lots of reasons, we think the broader policy is better. The notion of you telling low-income men that the only way they get a subsidy is to father kids out of marriage, that's not such a great policy, and so the broader policy makes a lot of sense. So we're very pleased with all this. Now, having said that, I want to be the one I'm going to try to lower our expectations a little bit, because I think it's almost certain that the impacts of this will be considerably smaller than the impacts for low-income moms in the 1990s. And I would hate for this thing to be viewed a failure just because the impacts were smaller than people expected. And let me throw out 3 or 4 reasons why I think. And I mean, as Doug said, this is a purely labor supply initiative. Trying to, in the jargon of economists, you're trying to push people up their labor supply curves. And that works perfect in a situation where we have no problems on the demand side of the market, no employment problems and strong demand, and no other offsetting issues on the supply side. And those conditions just don't hold in this case. So let me elaborate on sort of 3 or 4 reasons why I want our expectations to be a little more modest. First of all, the magnitude of the subsidies are good, but they're considerably smaller than what the low-income moms with 2 or more kids have. I mean, the 30% subsidy rate is actually a pretty good rate, but it maxes out much earlier. It maxes out under $7,000. The maximum subsidy is $2,000. That's less than half of what moms with 2 or more kids. And again, they don't have the custody of kids. I'm not criticizing it. It just means a smaller policy is going to have a smaller impact. The take-up rate will be smaller, and the effects on behavior probably smaller. But secondly, there are big problems on the demand side. I don't have to tell people, folks, that the recovery in the labor market from the Great Recession has been very, very sluggish. And it remains so, and it's likely going to remain to be that case through the duration of this pilot. And on top of that, even in a strong job market, I fear that a lot of the folks we're talking about today, low-income men, especially African-American men, are really the last people employers are interested in hiring, especially in this low-wage service sector. There's a lot of evidence that tells us that. Audit studies of employers, survey data on employers that I worked on a lot in the 90s, ethnographic studies of employers. Employers have a very jaundiced view of this population. A lot of stereotypes, a lot of statistical discrimination, limiting their interest in this population. And conversely, I think the ambivalence or the antipathy goes both ways. This is not, in fact, the sector that a lot of these men would prefer to work in if they had their druthers. I mean, even ethnographic work in these guys say they still would much rather have a construction job, a truck driver job, rather than a minimum wage job where they have to say, have a nice day at the end. You know, that's not what draws them. So even as separate from the job market, the demand effects and the supply effects in the sector might be muted. And finally, you do have the problem that a significant part of this population has the double whammy of having criminal records and or being in arrears on child support. So, and I think the criminal records, again, really limits demand, and the arrears in the child support, I think, really limits supply. I defer completely to Vicki on the child support issue, and I think those numbers have gotten a lot better. But as she suggested, the fact is that the credits are still going to get garnished right now for the men that are in arrears. They're just not going to see the money. And so that's going to certainly limit their interest and their take-up. And on the demand side, since a lot of these men have criminal records, employers are going to be very reluctant to hire them. Employers are fearful of this population of men, especially black men that have criminal records, for a lot of different reasons. Now, sometimes it's state and federal policy that actually prevents them from hiring these guys in places like elder care or child care. And I don't know the New York laws, if that's going to be a problem there. A lot of these employers simply fear legal liabilities, that if you hire somebody and they punch out a customer or a coworker, potentially there's legal liabilities on the employer for negligent hiring. The number of times that's actually happened is really quite small, and yet it's a fear that a lot of employers have that they want to avoid if they can. So I want to stop my negatives there. We have to expect that. I'm expecting the impacts to be positive. I'm hopeful to be positive, but modest in magnitude. And in our discussions of the advisory committee, we talked about all these things. And we talked about, can we take the sample, divide it up in certain ways to focus on these different populations, maybe target complementary services for the different parts of the population. And all of that would have required more money, I think, that Gordon had to spend on the population. Some of it actually would have required maybe a few changes also in child support law in the city that we also couldn't get. But I think the right way to think about this is there's never going to be a single policy bullet that solves the problem for this population. There's problems in all these dimensions. Therefore, any policy to really make a big dent is going to have several dimensions to it. I think this is one important dimension. I think it will have effect. And then what kinds of other things, employment services, criminal justice reforms, further child support reforms, can we also implement to complement this thing? And together, that package might be more successful than either of these policies on their own. So again, I remain very hopeful. And again, even if the effects are modest, I look forward to seeing them.
Joe Jones.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bell and Ron, thank you for hosting this event, inviting me to participate. Deputy Mayor, I both want to congratulate you on being bold and tell you how jealous I am of what you all are doing in New York, and hope that what we learn from this has the ability to be exported to other places around the country. I actually think that what is happening in this country with respect to the plight of low-income men across the ethnic spectrum, but particularly what's happening with black and Latino boys and men of color is unconscionable. It is just so dire in our communities. I'm a person who grew up in Baltimore, spent time on the other side of the fence, if you know what I mean. And so I've had an experience where I've been able to grow out of that experience. And it goes back, a couple of decades now. And what I see now in this generation of black men and boys, as opposed to the generation I came from, is that the circumstances are 10 times worse. To give you some example of what I mean as it relates to this conversation, in Baltimore, my organization is located in the zip code 21217. The adjacent two communities, 21215, a community called Park Heights, which is near Pimlico Racecourse, and 21216, which is near Coppin State University. Those three zip codes represent 5 of the top zip codes where the majority of people who are released from incarceration in the state of Maryland come back to. Also in those 3 zip codes, again, 21215, 16, and 17, there are approximately 800 men in each one of those zip codes who owe collectively around $20 million plus in back child support, right? The ability of a community to absorb that kind of debt and the behavior associated with it is, again, it's unconscionable, and it's almost impossible for a community to uplift itself when you have those kind of circumstances, and you don't have targeted approaches to dealing with these issues like the initiative we're talking about here with respect to the expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit. And obviously, we know that we're talking about this in terms of childless workers, but the implications for fathers with children who are not necessarily considered dependent, but those children are dependent on those fathers. And if we want those fathers to have a relationship with their children, we've got to figure out how do we do things that are creative enough so that, one, we encourage the men to come above ground, play the mainstream game. If they play the mainstream game, we don't cut them off at the neck when they pop their heads above the surface, right? Because it's a bait and switch game. And the one thing about these guys is they're not dumb. They may have done dumb things, but they're not dumb. And so when we have initiatives or policies that are like that, they're smart enough to stay underground, and they're going to do the things that they need to do to survive, and it's counterproductive to the quality of life in the community that we want children to be exposed to. So when I think about this project in terms of giving guys who want to try to do the right thing an opportunity, we've got to continue to drill deep. And Gordon and Harry, I want to thank you all for staying with your ideas over the last decade plus to make sure that something like this now comes to the point where we're looking at it. We have the best scientific rigor that we're applying to it, so we're going to learn good, bad, or indifferent. Harry, I understand that the outcomes we may see from this may not be significant, may be much more modest than people would like, but when you think about the dire circumstances of these guys, the likelihood that you're going to get significant outcomes early on is, it's not realistic, but it's the right thing to do. Secondly, there are a couple of things that are happening in the state of Maryland that encourage me that something like this could complement. Earlier this year, we worked with the Maryland State Legislature and one of our legislative champions, Delegate Sandy Rosenberg, and we advocated for a bill that would require the Maryland Department of Human Resources, which is where our TANF program, Child Support and Family Investment Administrations sit under one roof, to change the way in which they engage poor moms when they enter the welfare program, particularly the subset of those women who are in relationships with the fathers of their children, so that there's no longer just a conversation with her about child support related to her eligibility, and to bring the guy into the fold together. And the bill requires the Maryland Department of Human Resources, the Center for Urban Families, my organization, to work in partnership to change the way those interagencies work together. And I'm very encouraged because we've gotten the Annie Casey Foundation to work with us on the evaluation side of it, so that as these women go to welfare programs, we're now going to be working with them as couples to do two things: to help them increase their skills, relationship skills, but also to work with them jointly to get them into the labor market as a family unit, not just as individuals. And then the other part of this has to do with the fact that the child support anchor around the neck of these men has to be considered when we look at these policies, because if we're going to say that we want to expand the earned income tax credit to make these men more eligible, but we're not going to do something creative to kind of offset the implication of child support arrears in terms of collections, it's going to be a disincentive for them to participate. Second thing is that and I hope that this is being considered, is that the under-regulation or oversight of the commercial tax preparers is so critical to the efficacy and the integrity of this model, that if we don't make sure that people are not applying for or not having their taxes prepared, but applying for rapid advance loans and other products that allow them to be dragged into administrative fees that are 300, 400, 500, 700% against their ability to get those checks back as a refund, then we're going to be missing the boat. And then lastly, I would say that, one of the things that we've been able to advance in Baltimore is this partnership. This goes to the labor force issues that Harry talked about. We have a partnership with the Maryland Department of Human Resources and the Department of Social Services and Johns Hopkins University, and we're now looking to expand this with several other hospitals through a state-funded program where women who are on the DSS caseloads, the welfare caseloads, go through us through soft skills training. They then go into a 5-month internship program at Hopkins where they're allowed to keep their state benefits while they're in the internships, and they go through rotations at Hopkins. And then after the 5-month internship, they go into full-time employment opportunities within the hospital system. And now we're looking at the partners of those women to come up with a corollary set of services so that they could get into the hospital systems together. And then we have two other hospitals, University of Maryland Medical Center and Bon Secours Hospital, that are joining with us in exploring how to expand that. And I think this gives us the encouragement that if we can expand EITC and potentially think through how do we work with these couples who are interested in being together, we have the potential of impacting marriage rates, or at least cohabitation rates, relative to the families wanting to stay within a couple relationship and the impact for their children.
Great, thank you, Joe. Well, fortunately, Mr. Levin has arrived, and I can disentangle myself here without. So thank you so much for coming. I know it's been a problem with your schedule. We really appreciate you and your staff making all the adjustments so you could appear. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Levin has been in Congress for 31 years. He represents Michigan's 9th District, fortunately north of Detroit, not in Detroit. He's a top Republican on the Ways and Means Committee, which means, if you think a little bit in the future, that should those Republicans continue to behave the way they are, soon he could be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and then we'll have a hell of a time getting him to come back here. I had an opportunity to watch him directly for 14 years. I was on the staff of the Ways and Means Committee, and here's a conclusion that I would come to about Mr. Levin. He's one of the most thoughtful, well-prepared, and determined, and I mean determined, members of Congress. You do not want to be on the other side. With regard to today's topic, Mr. Levin has always showed a commitment to policy for the poor, and especially for children. He's been a champion for them throughout his career, and again, extremely knowledgeable on the programs, which are incredibly complex, and yet he mastered the programs, knew more about them than just about anybody on the committee, especially once Tom Downey left, and so he was always a great champion for children. So, Mr. Levin, we're so glad you could come today and talk about this important policy initiative.
Hi, Ron. Nice to see you, all of you, and Belle. I wanted to come in part because I don't get here enough. It's one of my favorite institutions. And so, in a sense, whatever the subject, I like to be there even if I don't know much about it. I'm sorry I'm a bit late. In a sense, not much is happening here, but in other respects, a lot's happening. And today is a day when lots is happening regarding health care. So I was delayed because of that, and when I leave, I'll go back into that thicket. I wanted to say just a few words before I got into this subject based on my experiences back home last week and the weekend. I had a meeting with workers who have been unemployed, in most cases over 6 months. And we sat around for an hour talking about their lives. And it was very striking as they talked about the struggles to find employment, as they talked about the importance of their unemployment insurance, as they talked about their efforts to find new careers, as half of them who were in their 40s and 50s explained the difficulties of finding work if you're in your 40s and 50s and early 60s. I'm not sure how much work has really been done. There's a law against age discrimination. Many of them indicated they did not put any indication on their CV that might tip off what their age was. So they would put, they went to school, but not when they graduated. But it was really very telling what the atmosphere is around in this country. And then I went to a church-based pantry on Saturday. I had been there a year before, and when I walked in to where the pantry is, it was striking how empty the shelves were. And I found it very disconcerting because there's been so much demand for food that half of their shelving was totally empty. And then I met 3 couples who came there for food. People who had worked, in some cases drawing unemployment insurance, other cases haven't exhausted it. And they told me their efforts to find work, and even if they had some help like unemployment insurance, there wasn't enough money for them to pay their, in one case, a mortgage, keep a car so they could look for work. I mention this because I do think as we look at this issue that you're focusing on today, we have to realize the basic environment in which a lot of our fellow and sister human beings are operating today. A very difficult one indeed. So I think that makes all the more important what you're discussing today, because you're asking, we have a law that goes back many years that was, if anything, was bipartisan, that was it, the EITC. And how it has, with the child tax credit, lifted, according to recent data, 9 million people out of poverty. And the idea that we need to look into it further and see if there are ways to improve it. Ironically, going back to my first thought, in Michigan, last year they reduced the Michigan EITC. And I found it hard to understand. And I just went back and looked at the figures. If I can find them, I just scribbled them down again. It reduced the benefit of the Michigan EITC in average from $439 to $132. And so one has to wonder why that would be done. So in a sense, and I wanted to come here really to congratulate you for your immersing yourself in this issue. There has been legislation over the years to try to do some adjustment to this. I think the term childless, you probably have talked about this, the term childless worker is a misnomer, right? Because in many, many, many cases, they're really not childless, right? I don't know all the data, but if the divorce rate in this country is 50%, that's about what it is. It means that a lot of these workers are not childless, right? They're called that, I guess, because they don't have the structure in terms of the divorce that they have custody or share custody, is that correct, of children, so they're called childless. So I think what you're doing is really important, and this experiment in New York is critical because I'm sure you're discussing this. What the EITC has been doing is not only to try to ease the financial burdens on people, but I think often has major social implications and provides an environment so that families can function more effectively. So I'm not what else I should say. There are other factors. Clearly, we have to have more effective training and retraining availabilities. I remember going to a facility a year ago at the Macomb Community College, and there were 30 people there who had been laid off, who were engineers or who were experts in software, and they were in a course trying to upgrade their skills. And almost all of them were in their late 40s and 50s. And their main concern was, as they upgraded their skills, whether people would hire them at their age. And frankly, I found it rather sad, because I didn't know what to say to them as they labored there to upgrade their skills already being skilled. So I think, if I might suggest, what you need to do is to hammer home that there is a gap here in the EITC, which has been working well, but it misses a lot of people that it should affect. And that this is an experiment, as I understand it, to drive home that point. And as I understand it, to look at the environment in which this tax provision or this provision would operate. So let me say one last thing. We haven't been functioning very well. It's so different, Ron, from the days when you were there. I think we didn't always agree, but I was on the conference committee on welfare reform, and you were a critical part of it. And there was enough sense of trust that we could sit down and argue, and in many cases, if not most, come out with the result. And we've lost so much of that, and we need to somehow find ways to renew it. And I want to mention this because there was a hearing on Ways and Means about problems with EITC. Some of you maybe were there. And there were discussions about the missed payments, the overpayments, the problems with the EITC. So I discussed with the staff, because we haven't spent much time on this recently, and they were reminding me that the figures that we work with are from 2006. And so the whole focus of the hearing was on the problems that we have, the missed payments, the overpayments, et cetera, based on data that is essentially 6 to 7 years old. And when we talk about referring to it in terms of 2009, they're really not 2009 figures. And what bothered me about it was that we need to look at problems of efficiency. We need to look at problems of effectiveness. We need to look at the areas where programs aren't working well. It has to be done in a spirit of trying to make them better, not make them worse. And too much of what's going on in this town, if I might say so, is oversight not to make a program better, but to try to see if you can make it worse or not exist at all. So in a sense, all of you working on this, you're a ray of sunshine. And I hope very much that this ray of sunshine will have so many emissions that it will spread throughout this town and touch areas other than this. So congratulations on your work. Do you want to talk for a couple minutes? Was that, I've interrupted you.
No,
Okay.
that'd be great. You can stay for
Yeah. I'm
just a
fine.
couple minutes, so let me,
No, it's fine. I'm fine. I'm just,
Okay.
I just looked at my watch only because I know something is coming, but
Okay.
it's not coming for quite a while yet.
okay, good. So first of all, let me give an example of the way things used to work. I can distinctly remember sitting in a basement in the Capitol in one of those dark, gloomy rooms at something like 1 o'clock in the morning as you pestered Clay Shaw about the contingency fund. The welfare reform bill had a puny little fund in it that hardly gave any money during the recession. We wound up with a $2 billion contingency fund, entitlement money in the fund, and I'd say 95% due to your, I wouldn't say orneriness. And Clay Shaw said, yeah, we got to do this. So, and there were a lot of things like that. It is the way it used to work. And in fact, that leads to my question. So the EITC, you don't get it unless you work. And this group, men that have been left out, and Republicans have repeatedly shown they are concerned about men. They put a provision in the legislation about marriage. It had a separate section for men. So both because it makes people work and because it focuses on men, a group that Republicans are concerned about. And let's say that 2-3 years from now we find out it actually does increase our labor force participation and even does something about their child support payments. Can you imagine that you could reach a bipartisan agreement where you would spend $20 or $30 billion on a program like this that would have those effects?
But by the way, we know what's happened to the wages of most of the men in this structure, right? I mean, the data on wages for middle-income men and women, those figures are startling. And you all have worked on it. And you could, in your sleep, talk about what's happened and how in the last 30, 35 years, there are various sources, how essentially huge numbers of people have been going backwards and more men than women. So that should be a prelude to my giving you a very positive yes. But I don't want to beat the drum too much, but it requires our resetting the environment and the atmosphere in Washington, if I might say so. Because we're going to have a fight, if I might just give you an example, over the federal program on unemployment insurance. On December 28, 1,200,000 people are going to lose all of their unemployment insurance, every dollar. That's how many people have gone beyond the state program and are in EUC, the federal program. 1,200,000 people. The next 6 months beyond that, if we don't act, there'll be another 1.5 million. You would think, in view of that, there's no phase down. You would think, this is 3 days after Christmas, you would think that we could garner our resources and discuss it and resolve it. I'm afraid to say, as of today, there has been no such discussion, except among a few of us. So that's kind of a long answer, Ron, but I think you need to push this. It makes so much sense. My guess is it's going to have social ramifications that people don't understand fully. We don't understand. I got from a report from a staff member about the school district in suburban Detroit in which my late wife and I raised our children, and a report on the number of kids who come to school every morning who have not had any breakfast. And for me, it was so painful. So I think you need to pursue this as we try to get people talking about the potential benefits of this program. Okay, what else?
Question from the audience? Yes. Wait till the microphone comes. Give us your name and ask it. A brief question, please. Here's it.
Ron's tough, by the way.
Just great having you here. I'm Malcolm Lovell, and I headed the Employment Service.
Hi, I thought hi, Malcolm. My Lord.
One of the problems that we found when I was working in the Antipoverty program was among...
Malcolm, make sure everybody can hear you.
One of the main problems in the black community was the number of single-parent families, and only about 10% of the black births in those days were to a family that was not split. And I just wondered, is there any change in that? Is the black community now coming up with more married couples or not?
I'm not sure of the data, but I think everybody realizes that I think within the black community there's a growing concern about that. I mean, you look back 30, 40 years ago, take Detroit that has been so devastated. When I worked at Dodge, Maine one summer, you could do that in the summer, there was steady employment, and the industrial wage base for so many families essentially was eroded and in many cases destroyed. It's an important issue and a complicated issue, and my guess is that a program like this can have important ramifications potentially in terms of family structure. You'll see, right?
Yes.
You'll see. And that's why you should do it. No, it is fabulous that you're doing this, and that you're doing it with a wide wing spread. That's fabulous.
One more question from the audience. In the back there, right?
Jacqueline Shearer, retired professor from Oakland University.
Really?
Wouldn't a WP...
Oakland, Michigan, I assume.
Yes,
Oakland, Michigan.
There's only one Oakland University.
Right. Wouldn't a program like the WPA or a Works Progress program accomplish some of the things you wanted?
Well, it's an entirely different subject, but I mean, I'll finish with this. We're having so much trouble getting ourselves together that we have trouble even passing an infrastructure bill. And we know that we were talking about this today or yesterday, because there's some thought we should put more money into infrastructure. And we were talking about the economic impact of extending unemployment insurance and spending some of that money, because it's about $25 billion a year on infrastructure. I don't want it to be either or. And it was pointed out that the startup time for infrastructure is longer than the impact of unemployment insurance. But the answer is sure we should have had a major infrastructure. It won't be 30, 40 years ago. The truth of the matter, it won't be, and we have other ways to do it. We've had construction workers a few years ago, if you went to any metropolitan area, 25, 35% of the construction workers were unemployed. 35% were unemployed. And it's had so many ramifications. You know the ramifications it's had for their pension funds, for their health insurance funds. The construction industry has had historically strong pensions and strong insurance funds. Because of the lack of funding for infrastructure, a good number of the Taft-Hartley construction funds in this country are in deep trouble. And the Teamster Central Fund is in very deep trouble. And they're tied into construction. The answer is sure. Just roam around, just go up and down these streets. If you don't believe it, come with me as I drive in and go to the Capitol. And the road leading on to east-west is, I mean, it's. I was in Bangladesh in the summer, and the roads are about just as bad as they are there. Sure. Well, I really enjoyed this, and I so congratulate you and all of you for doing this. This is an institution that I think has managed to carry on regardless, and good luck with this project.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so now a couple of questions, and then we'll have a couple of questions from the audience. Oh, I took, yeah. Sorry.
Nothing secret in it.
It'd be safe with me if there were. One time we had Eleanor Holmes Norton here, and we were sitting at a table, and she had all her notes right there. She hadn't spoken yet, and I had a cup of coffee, and I spilled my coffee all over the place. She was not pleased. All right, so I want to ask a couple questions. Vicki, I'd like to start with you. You wanted to talk about garnishment, which I think is a good thing, but I want to ask you another question I think is really important and interesting, and that is that it started in Texas. This might be the only thing that started in Texas the administration really likes, apparently, but Texas had a program where they helped fathers who owed child support get money. The biggest cause of not paying child support is guys don't have money.
Right.
And so they decided to try to help them find jobs.
Right.
And now the administration and the Congress, I think, even has gotten involved, sees this as a good idea. And why don't state child support enforcement programs try to help people get jobs? Mm-hmm. So my question is, first, do you agree with that? And secondly, couldn't something like an earned income tax credit even augment those programs and make them more effective?
Yes and yes.
Thank you very much.
But I have a longer answer. The Texas program is not the only program.
No, I know.
In fact, the majority of states now have at least one local child support-led or coordinated employment program. Now, we don't have authority to pay for those services, and so that would be something Congress could take up. But we are ourselves conducting a large-scale random assignment study of non-custodial parent employment programs being led by Jennifer Brzezinski, who's here in the audience here on my staff. And Texas is one of those 8 sites. But there are a number of models. New York had a model that had positive results in terms of employment, earnings, and child support payments, and it lasted over time. So yes, I think child support and employment programs for non-custodial parents work very effectively together. We're seeing positive results, and it's sort of a natural fit for us.
Okay, good. Thank you. Now, let's just say a few words about garnishment. I'd like to hear what you think about garnishment. Tell people what garnishment is first, or there might be one person out there who doesn't know.
All right. If you have a child support order, you are subject to payroll withholding, sometimes called garnishment, sometimes called income withholding, from your paycheck. Child support is paid in this country primarily, in fact, 70% of child support collected is paid through payroll withholding. And you don't have to be behind on your child support. It's the primary way we collect child support if you owe child support. And so the question here, the design question here, is whether EITC benefits in, I'm going to say not in the demonstration project because, you know, that's a demonstration project, but in terms of policy, whether child support should be offset from EITC. So there's payroll withholding, and then there's also we in the states collect child support debt through tax offsets, federal and state tax offsets. And the question is, should EITC be exempt from that process of offset? I would argue no. And I guess I would preface my remarks by saying we understand the disincentives to low-wage employment that unrealistically high support orders and unrealistically high payroll withholding levels and unrealistically high debt can create for low-skilled, marginally employed men, non-custodial parents. Parents need to support their kids, but they also need to survive themselves, and that's the dilemma. We are working very hard in the child support program across the country, including New York City, to adopt effective child support procedures in this area, to set orders based on real income, not made-up income, as has been true in the past, to reduce debt, to connect to employment programs, to intervene early, to bring both parents together, the whole range of what we call family-centered policies and practices. And we're seeing a lot of change through the country. It's not complete yet by any means.
Good.
And there are many fathers that have high debt. But I also think, just to say one more thing, that EITC is garnished for a variety of debts, not just child support, including student loans. Most families use their EITC benefits to pay off bills. I mean, I did when I was a low-income single parent and got EITC. I used it to pay bills. And so why should we take the money off the table? We need to fix the child support policies. We don't necessarily need to take money off the table for EITC availability for supporting your kids.
Interesting answer. Linda, New York's a very political place. I'd be like, do you want to add something to that?
Can I just know the facts on the pilot? Will this pilot be subject to garnishment, child supporters?
It won't be sort of automatically by virtue of participation, but the participants will be subject to all the city's normal child support routines.
So it could be.
It could be. It could be.
Okay.
It could be.
Right. So let me ask you a follow-up
Did I
question.
get that
here.
right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
A couple of the panelists have mentioned about that this group of fathers that we often think about are not necessarily a sympathetic group and don't necessarily have great political power. So now you have this remarkable new program for this group. Tell us about the politics of it. Do you think something like this would pass the city council? Do you think something like this is likely to be expanded? Do you think that voters would support it and so forth?
I think that you have to make the case. I don't think that there is automatically great sympathies. The perspective, the way that we've taken this on, is to try to be a lot more explicit about the social disparities that are experienced by Black and Latino young men in the city, to put that out there so that people understand that their graduation rates are half the rates of white men. Well, under Mayor Bloomberg, we've closed that disparity, so now they're about 75% the rate of white men. The justice outcomes are just heartbreaking. They're 26 times more likely to be involved in the justice system compared to white men. Across the board, their employment rate's much lower, and so to make people more aware of the specifics of how vast those disparities are. And to appeal to them on justice, social justice grounds as the first appeal. And as the second appeal, to appeal to them in terms of their own self-interest and to understand the incredible drag on the economy that results from underemploying, undereducating, over-incarcerating vast swaths of our population, and pulling them out of the economic mainstream is, so not only do you have to pay the high costs associated with those negative outcomes, but you also deprive the country of an economic force that should be working in your favor to make us even more competitive economically. And so trying on both levels to make that appeal is part of what we are trying to be explicit about. But it really is an uphill battle. And I think the more and more and more that we can show that our public programs are successful, and you can have an impact, and you can sort of reduce the barriers that are prohibiting individuals from being successful in our economy and in our society, and show that potential, then the evidence can help to sort of make the case and sort of foster more public support for these initiatives.
Great, thank you. So Doug and Harry. Harry raised this. It was just raised, Mr. Levin, his solution was WPA. I'm not sure that would fly with either one of you, I don't know. But demand is an issue here. I mean, the jobs are going to be hard to come by, especially some places in the country, in Mr. Levin's district and south of his district in Detroit, for example. So what would you do on the demand? So what would you do to produce more jobs? What's your solution to that part of the problem?
Broad answer would be certain fiscal policy changes that Doug and I are probably going to disagree on. So I'm not even going to go there. Politically, it's not going to happen anyway. I would support a targeted job creation effort that included public service employment along with infrastructure and some of the other things. Politically, that's probably not going to happen. So I think within the realm of what is politically possible, there's a set of ways to expand job creation. For instance, transitional jobs is something that has been talked about a lot for this population. So far, I mean, it's interesting, so far the evaluation evidence on the best of the programs suggests they don't increase employment rates after the subsidy ends. While the subsidy's in place, they do dramatically, and they have other offsetting benefits like reducing incarceration, recidivism, again, for the best programs. So that might be our best effort to create more. And of course, the other thing on the demand side is I think there are things you could do on the criminal justice side for guys with criminal records. It's actually illegal for any firm to say, I'm not going to hire anybody with a felony conviction, because that has this disparate impact on black men. The EOC has ruled on that. It still happens a lot. One can imagine simply enforcing that law more effectively, pushing the states to reconsider some of their legal barriers that they've put in place for this population. You can imagine some of those things, plus even just better job placement services for these. So much of this is statistical discrimination against guys that employers fear. If you go to an employer and say, look, this guy had one nonviolent felony conviction. It was 5 years ago. Their odds of reoffending are low. Let's show you the certificate of what they've done since then. You can imagine that simply providing more information.
There are bonds too, right? Aren't there bonds that the employer can get?
There's almost no take-up of that. But you can imagine a set of things all together that really would start to make a dent.
Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing is to recognize that something like this would be a structural change, and you shouldn't confuse it with the short-run demand problem, which we have and we need to deal with. I mean, it's always a mistake to oversell something as like, this is going to solve our short-run problems. That's what's happened with infrastructure. It gets sold as stimulus. We need better infrastructure. It should not be sold as stimulus. We get better infrastructure programs, fund them, and have them. So I would hope this debate would be about poverty, targeting poverty effectively, rewarding work, and all good things flow from work. If you look at the correlations, people at work succeed much more in America. So that's the conversation to have, and to simply get something better in place, and then come back to these demand problems that are real. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Okay, good. Joe, the rest of us speculate about this stuff and read the research studies and so forth, but you live it every day. You live it yourself in your personal life. Here's the question. When you were 23 or 24, someone comes along and says, get a job, we're going to give you $2,000 extra. First, would that be enough to convince a lot of the people that you work with, these young men, that it might be worth it to take that job at a gas station for $7 an hour or $8 an hour? And secondly, if the answer to that first one is yes or a little bit, then do you think that it would have an impact on their behavior, especially the probability they would be incarcerated again and their relationship with the women in their life and so forth?
Well, if you ask me about a population, a generation of folks back then.
No, I'm talking now.
Now, we have so many things competing against what we're trying to do for young, particularly young men, right? There are two things in particular that really are charged. One is relative to men in our country, generally speaking. We don't necessarily believe that men of any color, of any socioeconomic background, should receive support. They should be able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they fall, and that's it, right? Secondly, I think the vestiges of race and slavery in this country still have not been overcome to the point where there's a segment of our society that don't believe men of color should receive any kind of support, particularly something like what we're talking about, expanding EITC. That said, there are sources of support in community, I think, that are untapped that young men are largely missing from, right? The church in the black community should be a central player in anything that we do relative to getting people in the community, in this case, young black men, out of the hellhole that many of them exist in. I think the fact that so many of these men come from father-absent households where the model of behavior with respect to a work ethic has never existed for them. And so we're talking about now convincing them that they should take a legal job where a $2,000 subsidy is going to be attracted to them against the other earning opportunities in the community is very, very limited. That's why our institutions in the community, whether it's community-based organizations like the Center for Urban Families, our churches, some of our state agencies, and I think that some of the policies that we've had where it's just not safe, it's not perceived as being safe to go to child support is a huge disincentive. The fact that we have, stop and frisk policies in so many of our communities, young black men and Latino men don't trust systems, right? So you have all of that tugging against that. So the partnerships that are absolutely necessary for something like this to be optimally effective have to be, they have to really be worked to make sure that it's not just the opportunity exists, but the connectivity to it. And then the constant support with these young men to get them to understand that this is something that's available to you and you can take advantage of it, but to simply say, here it is, and expect that there's going to be a huge on-ramp to utilization, I think is not necessarily something that's going to be as beneficial to them as we would like for it to be.
Great, that's a good answer. Okay, audience. A couple questions in the audience. Tell us your name and ask a brief question, please. Let's start right here on the left.
My name is Mark Swartz, and I have a question for Mr. Jones and Ms. Gibbs about the philanthropic community, foundations, and individuals, whether a program like this that's proven effective, EITC, could attract the interest of philanthropists interested in making an impact on poverty. I know that previous CEO efforts have attracted Robin Hood Foundation's interest, and Mr. Jones, you mentioned the Casey Foundation.
You want to go?
Yeah, our entire array of anti-poverty initiatives and the Young Men's Initiative is a public-private partnership. So we've had incredible support from Robin Hood and Star, Rockefeller, Bloomberg Philanthropies, New York, in small organizations, New York Community Trust, small community-based philanthropies. And that has been really critical. And the way that we tried to stack that up is to use the philanthropic dollars either for things that are a little bit more out there. And so to the extent that you say, this is something you should try, not with taxpayer dollars, or for things where the philanthropic dollars can jumpstart something, but then the savings associated with those initiatives can then feed in later and keep it going. So it's a great sort of initiation fund. In this case, this is being spent with, paid for with city tax levy dollars, so it's not philanthropic dollars in particular. Our question really, and this is what the mayor struggled with, he liked it, he believed it was something that ought to be tried, he feels like that it's going to work. His struggle was, should a local government pay for this? And because it was a pilot and we're testing it and it's clearly being done in a way that we would not have an intent of taking this to scale with city dollars. It's just not, it's sort of the type of income redistribution policy that is appropriate only for the federal level to do. But we're doing it with city tax levy dollars in order to test the proposition, in order to make the case so that federal policy folks could answer the question about the investment.
Joe.
Yeah, I actually think that, that we are in a very encouraging environment with respect to your question. And I'll mention two examples of why I think that. One, anytime that you have two of the most wealthiest men in the world, George Soros and Michael Bloomberg, co-investing in something, it's like Beyonce. If Beyonce changes her hairstyle, young ladies throughout our society will change their hairstyle to mirror Beyonce. Well, when George and Bloomberg start something, it has a reverberating effect. To that point,
I'll let the mayor know you equated him to Beyonce.
Earlier this year,
he has better hair.
Earlier this year at the Council on Foundations convening in Chicago, 26 of the nation's most influential philanthropic organizations pledged to look at ways to co-invest in issues that impact black men and boys. And they're currently trying to figure out how to translate those pledges into action. So there are a number of conversations that are happening that will help this coalition of foundations to consider what it will do around these kind of investments. And I think that a model like this has huge potential and interest from a group like that.
Boy, that's interesting. Yeah, another question. There was right here on the...
Hi, I'm Emily Braid, and I am the UK Ambassador Social Policy Advisor. So I'm really excited to see things that are mirroring the national level universal credit revolution that's happening in the UK, making work pay. But I really wanted to ask what we've been touching on a bit about reemployment services. And I think, Ron, you made the good point that, if you came up to somebody and said, get a job, here's $2,000 extra bucks, but how do you get the word out? How do you sort of change your American job centers to engage with the unemployed population more actively in New York City? Because I don't think you can do a project like this without, in tandem, reforming how you engage with that unemployed population at the point of reemployment services. So, Ms. Gibbs, you could answer that, and anyone else who'd like to address it.
Yes and no. And the reason I say yes and no is one of the considerations in design was, should we actually hardwire this right to employment services? And the challenge is that if we did that, then we would be testing a two-proposition intervention, not just the EITC. And so we wanted this test to mirror the real world as much as possible. And at this point, there is not a parallel investment in comprehensive, entitlement job training services. And so what we will see, because there are a lot of efforts going on simultaneously with within our initiatives around retooling a lot of our workforce approaches to assist disconnected youth in particular to get connected. It is possible that they will see some of those services in their environment. I don't know that we, in our evaluation design, that we'll be able to control for that. Don't think so. So the yes part of my answer is that we see with our Young Men's Initiative, we not only wanted, we really wanted to touch the effort from every point of view, from employment, education, justice, health, and because we don't know where the right triggers are, and we don't know what's going to be enough to shift the outcomes. And if we just took one approach, it would assume that our knowledge about, if it's all education, that's it. But we don't know that's the answer. And so we have this very comprehensive approach. And so if you're trying to build a set of circumstances that can get out all those barriers with as much sort of energy and enthusiasm as possible, you got to sort of run on all drives. But in this case, we really wanted to test the EITC as it would exist in the real world.
Harry Holzer.
So what we mostly have in the United States are these one-stop shops. These guys aren't going to walk into a one-stop shop, and even if they did, they're not going to get the level of the intensity of the services they need. To me, the folks that do a good job on this like the Center for Employment Opportunity in New York, outfits like Joe's. You need an intermediary that works actively both with employers, creating the demand, trying to offset some of their negative impressions. First of all, making the connection at all to employers, and then trying to offset a lot of their negative impressions, and then working with the young men themselves, and maybe trying to deal with their child support issues and things like that. And that, the most successful job developers have a lot of things in their toolkit. They can't just rely on one thing. This would be an additional powerful tool, hopefully, among others. And I think that would be the right way. If you could scale up some of those efforts along with this on top of these other things, then hopefully that toolkit together would be more powerful and more effective. And I think that's the right way to think about it. And it still wouldn't be that expensive to try to scale up relative to a lot of the other remedies that one could think about.
One more question. Back there.
Hi, I'm John Langrock from the Office of Child Support Enforcement. And I guess this gets back to the last couple of questions that we're just asking. And Mr. Jones, I guess, hit right on it, being actually living it. Is $2,000 going to be enough incentive to get anything? And Mr. Gordon had mentioned it in the design that we should expect low impacts. So, Ms. Gibbs, my question to you is, are there these comprehensive programs in the design evaluation? Are you considering that right now? Because, are there fatherhood programs connected? Is there case management connection to the group that will be the experimental group? Because $2,000 just probably will not cut it.
Okay, before you answer that, let's let this young lady here had a question. Let's let her ask her question, and the panelists can answer either one. Right over here, yeah.
Oh, my question is actually related to that. My question builds on Emily's. I'm Ann, assessor from the Ways and Means Committee. Builds on Emily's question and the one that was just asked about lump sums versus kind of getting a supplement as you go, and that kind of effect has on workers. So you're telling men, go get a job, we'll give you $2,000 in a year plus 4 months down the road. And so just thinking about that aspect.
Okay, go ahead. Anybody on the panel say whatever they would like to, including last words.
So there's nothing hardwired, and I won't take the time to go through the entire CEO, YMI portfolio, or all of our small business training programs. They exist, and a lot of the work that we're doing is to figure out why young men won't walk through the door of our one-stop job centers, and so how do we restructure approaches that get them into those programs. But this is maybe it comes back to thinking about the question with the garnishment. I think this has been hard, and I may be disagreeing with my own decision. But I think what we want to know here is if the $2,000 is enough. And I think if we hardwire any take back, before they even get it, we're depriving ourselves of the knowledge of whether it's enough. And it is the case that there are a number of governmental supports that go to them, to go to their children. And some sort of, fiscal equity, policy decision might say, you want to take it back. On the one hand, you can't give it because you're in need when you're no longer in need because you've gotten this other thing. But on the other hand, these are really, really poor, disconnected guys who've got a lot of history. And maybe, if you think about it, it's more important for them to get themselves out of shelter because now they can pay the rent in a way that they couldn't before. And that at that step might put them on a better path to being able to pay child support later. And so I think I come down on this garnishment issue of wanting to know whether it is enough, and to understand this in the trajectory of somebody's life experience, and that the fact that you believe that they should meet their legal obligations on child support doesn't have to lead you to the conclusion that they have to pay it, day one before they even get the money in their pocket. So that's, sort of the tension there on the garnishment issue. And, I suppose on the EITC and lump sum versus trickle it along the way, There's something, it may be one of these irrational
Linda,
economic
first, will you
decisions.
tell us there are no additional provisions for continuous payments that'll mostly come as one payment, or is that not
We're
right?
mirroring the real world EITC as
Yeah.
much as possible. We talked about that, but we said this is the policy we're testing, so let's do it. Let's make it look and feel and behave like a real EITC. It's interesting that some people behave in what might seem economically irrational ways. But sort of going after a lump sum sometimes can feel a lot bigger than if you divide it by 52, and it's like, and you'll get an extra. I don't do math that quickly. $100 a week or whatever. That's way too much, right? You'll get Well, now I make my point. You'll get an extra 37 cents a week. And it's just like, that doesn't really feel like it. But you'll get $2,000. You're like, whoa, lotto. Yeah. So there's. And I know MDRC has a lot of research, including stuff that they've done in the UK around more paced out in economic incentives.
Anybody else on the panel want to add anything?
I'll say one thing. This is my positive scenario that I'm hoping for. First of all, I'm hoping Gordon's study generates positive impacts, even if they're small. 2, 3, 4 percentage points would be great. Then, if people say, well, how much would it really cost to do this at the federal level, some version of this, 15 billion, 20 billion, that's never going to happen on its own. But if a comprehensive tax reform effort ever does start to occur, and I would ask Doug if this, within the broader context of that conversation, could something like this be tucked in and actually maybe
that was the point I
come?
was going to make. I mean, that is the opportunity because the EITC does have a good bipartisan history. Any tax reform will have to be bipartisan, and there's always this issue of the distributional tables, and this is a wonderful tool to solve the distributional tables in a tax reform. And so that is an opportunity it's worth thinking about.
Mm-hmm. May I respond to Ann's question?
Please do.
And this is not data. This is just having lived the life from a different perspective, which is how do you use money of your low-income marginal budget? How do you use money when it comes in as a lump sum versus it comes in every month? And just speaking from a personal observation, if it comes in a lump sum, you're more likely to pay off bills, debts, and save some, if you can, or pay for a special, some sort of investment. If it comes in every month, you will use it for rent and you will use it for food, and so it's a different use of the money. I think there are advantages to both, but I think as you said, that when you get it in a lump sum, there are more possibilities, I guess.
Joe Jones.
So 2 things. One, I think that, John and both of you mentioned it. I think case management coupled with financial education has to be a part of the equation so that cumulatively, particularly when you're talking about young people, that we're able to help them to understand how to budget, even if they don't get it right away. I mean, at 23, I don't know how smart I was about money. And obviously, with my other background, I wasn't very smart at all. But I think that there's a way in which we can help people, build their acumen. Secondly, with respect to couples who want to form relationships, and the notion that it's sort of like when a couple applies for a mortgage, right? You look at the 2 people's credit scores independently, and the mortgage industry will base the loan on the person with the lowest credit score, right? So in effect, you have a mortgage with a higher interest rate, right, when you really could average them out. While for the couples who would be potentially eligible for the earned income tax credit who want to be together, why don't we similarly look at the income of the lowest earner, right, and make the earned income tax credit applicable to that person's earnings as opposed to averaging it out for both.
Good point. So we've come to the end. I'd like to thank you. You've been a great audience, and please join me in thanking the panel.